Okay, great. Well, thank you, everybody, and thanks for that introduction. What I'm going to talk about today is understanding people and communicating with them. And the point is that it's really important to understand people and what they know about invasive species, what their attitudes are, that sort of thing, and why they may or may not already be taking preventive action if you're going to communicate with them. At the outset here, I'd like to just thank the sponsors of the projects that we've worked on at Nova Scotia Invasive Species Council. So the two sponsors are Fisheries and Oceans Canada and the Nova Scotia Department of Natural Resources. So there's two different projects, but the information here has been gathered over those two projects. So that's the information I'm going to present. We have a couple of polling questions for you, so maybe we could do the first one now. Okay, great. And so 83% involved in communications and outreach on invasive species. We can ask the second question. Great to see so many people I know in the chat. And I saw your message, Kelly Cooley. Look forward to seeing you face to face soon at some event. And 21% are using behavioral psychology already. So that's great. Thank you very much, everyone, for that. So the most important thing you can take from this presentation today is that just because when we do community engagement and outreach, that we can foster the sense of attitude and awareness about the topic of invasive species that we would like to foster. It doesn't mean that the people that we're talking to and communicating with and educating are necessarily going to take the action that we want them to take. And this is a pretty common situation. We probably all can think of examples of this. And in fact, today is March 1st, and it was only 2 months ago today that a whole bunch of us made New Year's resolutions, the promises to ourselves to take new actions, and 2 short months later, we're likely not doing them. And one of those months was a short one. So just having the right attitude and awareness and intent to take an action doesn't necessarily mean that the action gets adopted. And psychologists call that the intention-action gap. So from that, as I say, this is the most important thing you can take from this presentation is just convincing people something is a good idea does not mean that they're going to end up doing it. I'm going to talk to you about what we need to do in order to get people to adopt our preferred behaviors. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't do the traditional communication and education that we would normally do, because it's really important that people do have that intention. They do have the right attitude and awareness. An example I'd like to use to illustrate that is, can you imagine that if people didn't know about the benefits of blood donation and didn't realize what a good thing you can do if you're donating blood, and you stood out on the sidewalk in front of the blood donor clinic and said to passersby, please come into the building with me. We're going to lie you down on a bed for half an hour, stick a needle in your arm, and suck a pint of blood out of you. Not many people would do that. So we need to continue to foster the right attitude and awareness in people. We just can't stop there because it doesn't necessarily follow. And in fact, the first of only 2 behavioral economists who have won a Nobel Prize is Daniel Kahneman. And Daniel Kahneman says the most important thing that we need to do is in fostering new behaviors is to make it easy, make it convenient. And so we need to know what those barriers are that we have to remove that are making it inconvenient for people to adopt our behaviors. And there's no way that we can know that. We may be experts in invasive species, but we're not experts in what other people are thinking. So the only way to know that is to do research. When we do research, like surveys, we find out why people are not taking the actions that we want them to take, and we identify those barriers, and then we remove them. And we also find out, for those people that are doing it, what's motivating them, because we might be able to leverage the motivators. So I'm going to focus today on research and barriers. Just to fill it out here, we also, when we're applying behavioral psychology to behavior change programs, we're also using commitments and getting commitments from people, and then reminding them of the commitment and reminding them of what it is that they're supposed to do. And also using social norms to take advantage of peer pressure. So, but as I say, I'm going to focus on research and barriers. So we do surveys and we find out what's preventing people from doing things. I'm going to be using today examples from some recent research. In fact, the survey is just closing today, that we've done in Nova Scotia across a number of pathways. But this is the result of a 2018 study across Canada that, for some reason, 2018 seems like a long time ago, because the last 2 years have been so friggin' long, I guess. But we asked people across Canada, 1,860 people, what prevents them from cleaning, draining, and drying their boats. And it was an open text question, and so this word cloud gives you a sense of what they typed in. The bigger the words are, the more frequently they were typed in. Lack of knowledge was the #1 issue. And laziness was in there as well, but it's not nearly as big as lack of knowledge. Forgetting was the second most important most often cited reason that people didn't clean, drain, and dry their boat. And not having the time, you can see time there, is significant as well. And anybody that has a boat and launches it and takes it out frequently knows about the pressures at a boat launch. If there's people waiting, they don't want you to be taking a serpentine backwards approach to the boat launch because you can't back up your trailer very well and that sort of thing. So there's pressures there. So you can see that equipment is under forgetting. Lack of equipment was a fairly small issue. It was lack of knowledge, forgetting, and not having the time were the main reasons that people didn't clean, drain, and dry their boats. So that's just an example. I just wanted to show you that we ask the question and we get this kind of valuable information. Now, I work on the human dimensions of invasive species, and I'm going to be talking about very personal activities. You know, obviously, flying around in planes and shipping cargo and all of that sort of thing are also human dimensions of invasive species. But I'm talking about more personal actions here, like moving firewood that may have forest pests in it. So in our study that we did for the Nova Scotia Invasive Species Council, we took a look at a bunch of different pathways: gardening, boating, hiking, working outdoors, having aquariums or keeping goldfish in ponds or whatever, and some other pathways as well. But this is the kind of thing that we asked about. So we asked people at the beginning of the survey, which of these activities are you involved in? And then we asked some questions. For those people who said yes to any of the activities, they would be asked questions about those particular activities. Now, we always start, and this is, I want to show you the kind of information that we're gathering. I'm not going to show you all the questions, but I want to just show you examples of the important information that you need to gather and need to understand in order to be effective in communicating with people to get them to change their behaviors. So one of the questions we asked, on a scale of 1 to 5, how important are Nova Scotia's natural areas to you? Well, you can see that 98% of the people answered very important, or extremely important. Now, that's wonderful. If they don't answer that way, and if people don't really care about the natural areas, well, those people would be problematic, and we would have to spend time in our program increasing their appreciation of the importance of Nova Scotia's natural areas. And I do work not just in invasive species, but energy conservation, water conservation, climate change, all kinds of different sustainability projects. And there are times when people just do not care that much about the environmental issues, and climate change is one. In some places, a lot of people don't even believe in climate change. So, but here in Nova Scotia, fortunately, we see that people do think natural areas are important and they want to protect them. So this is something we don't have to spend a lot of time on. We need to spend a little bit just to reinforce it, but we don't have to spend a lot of time in our program of convincing people that it's important to protect our natural areas, because they already think that way. We asked, how concerned are you about invasive species on a scale of 1 to 4? Similar results. We've got 97% of people are either very concerned or somewhat concerned about invasive species. So now we're only talking about awareness and attitude here, but fortunately, they have the kind of attitude and awareness about invasive species that we want to see. And we asked other questions too about how knowledgeable they are about the risks of invasive species. But this is what we like to see. And again, as we design our programs, we don't have to spend a lot of time trying to convince people that they should be concerned about invasive species, because they already are. We also asked about species at risk. So on a scale of 1 to 5, how important is the protection of species at risk to you? Again, big numbers, 95% think it's very important or extremely important. So again, they have the attitude and awareness, really, really good. I can tell you though, that about 14 or 15 years ago, I did a similar survey for a large organization in Ontario that works in species at risk. And we had a very large sample of people in Southwestern Ontario. And there were similar numbers like this, where people said it was really important to protect species at risk. And then we asked a question, follow-up question that said, how likely would you be to take action to support species at risk and protect species at risk? And people in very large numbers said, yes, I would do that, I would do that. And then we asked, what would prevent you from doing something for species at risk? And in very, very large numbers, like 75% or something, people said, I don't know what to do. So that, in that case, we realized, okay, we don't have to make sure that they think it's important, but we have to tell them what to do, or how are they going to be able to do it? And that was the barrier that we saw in that case. So these were questions that were asked of everybody that took the survey. Basically, as I said, there's more questions, but we have a very strong basis in Nova Scotia to work from. Some other questions, by the way, showed that people in Nova Scotia understand that they have an important role to play in protecting the environment from the natural areas from invasive species. They also recognize that they can create problems and they can move invasive species around. They also realize that they have, that their work, that invasive species can negatively affect species at risk, and that they therefore have a role in protecting species at risk by not spreading invasive species. So those connections came up in the survey, really important, because that means we don't really have to spend a lot of time convincing them of that. So I've got a few examples of some of the pathways I just wanted to go through with you. We asked people if they were gardeners. 77% of people said, yes, they gardened. So that's really good. Now, remember, everybody, it's like 98% or something, said invasive species, they were concerned about invasive species. when we asked those gardeners, do you have any invasive plants growing in your yard, garden, or planters? 44%, like almost half, said yes, they do. They're very concerned about invasive plants, but they have invasive plants in their yard, garden, or planters. And maybe just as concerning as 21% are not sure. So they have all this concern, but they don't even know if they have it in their yard. So there's a bit of disconnect here, and now we can start to see where we do have to start applying some of our outreach in order to shore this up. Like why, and we have to find out why people who are so concerned about invasive species would actually have it growing in their yard or garden. So we asked people, do you ever purchase, sell, or trade invasive plants? We wanted to know if they're acquiring invasive plants at the garden stores, or if they have invasive plants, are they selling them or trading them with people they know? And they said no, 92% said no. So if they're not purchasing them or trading them, why are they showing up in large quantities in their yards? We have to kind of figure that out. So we may have the answer in a few other questions. So the next question we asked, when you're getting new plants, so they're going to the garden store or whatever, do you take steps to avoid invasive plants? Well, 9 out of 10 people said they do, which is good. It still makes me wonder why so many of them have plants in their invasive plants in their yard though. Clearly we need to have a program like PlantWise where we tell people what they should not plant and what they should plant and what alternatives to invasive species are available to them. So this helps inform these results from this survey help us inform how we're going to best reach these people and get them to adjust their behaviors. So what about motivations? Well, for those people who said that they do take steps, you asked what motivates you to avoid invasive plants and choose native or non-invasive plants? And these are great numbers here, big numbers. I think the lowest is 55% on the bottom there, protection of other garden plants. But you can see 88% don't want to spread invasive species, that's near the bottom. 77% protection of native species, 62% protection of species at risk, 70% protection of habitat, biodiversity protection. So all of these things are really strongly held tenets, I guess, of the people who are taking steps, say that they're taking steps to not plant invasive species or acquire invasive species. So now we know if those motivators work, those are motivators we can use in our communications with gardeners through our PlantWise program. We also asked people who said that they didn't do anything. We asked about avoiding invasive plants. We asked them why they didn't. Well, look at that. 0, I've got it circled there. 0 said they were not concerned about invasive plants. So it wasn't because they weren't concerned about invasive plants. But what they did say, their answers were a lot about lack of knowledge. They don't know what is invasive, 42%. Don't know much about invasive plants, 40%. And look at the next red line, don't know what to do to avoid invasive plants, 36%. So that's lack of knowledge, just like that clean, drain, dry result that I was showing where people had said they had lack of knowledge. And look at that 70% one, no information on what is invasive and what is not invasive at garden stores. So they know that they can go to a garden store and buy stuff, but there's no information there that's going to help them, guide them to make a responsible decision. So that shows that the target audience for our PlantWise program is not only gardeners, but also the garden stores, because we've got to get them to either stop selling invasive species or helping people make right decisions, or both. So this is very valuable information that we need for our program. I told you that, I think I mentioned that Daniel, yes I did, Daniel Kahneman saying breaking down barriers and making things easier is the most important thing to do. This example is about recycling, but I just want to play it for you. You'll see that Anne in this video is going to talk with Bob. Bob doesn't recycle, and Anne is going to address 3 barriers that Bob throws up as reasons why he's not going to start recycling. And then she's going to ask for a commitment, and she's going to do that in less than a minute. So let's just hear how Anne handles this and breaks down Bob's barriers.
Hi, my name is Anne. I noticed that you don't have any recycling material out for collection. Is there anything I can do to help?
Hi Anne, I am Bob. I am not sure what is recyclable and what isn't, so I don't know what to do.
Well, I can help you with that. I have a brochure here explaining what is recyclable, what goes in the compost, and what is rubbish. Here you go. Is there anything else preventing you from recycling?
That seems like a lot of work. I don't know if I want to do all that sorting.
It isn't sorting. It's just a matter of putting things in the right bin when you don't want them anymore. It's not like you have to sort through a whole bunch of material.
Well, I suppose that's true. When you put it that way, it doesn't seem very difficult.
No, it isn't difficult. Is there anything else that I can do to help you start recycling?
I don't know which days I'm supposed to put out which bins. Do you have a schedule or something like that?
Sure, there is a collection schedule on the brochure I gave you. I suggest you do what I do and put a reminder on your mobile phone. Anything else you need?
No. Thank you.
My pleasure. Now that you have everything, will you recycle?
Yes. You can count on it.
So you see, when you do the research and you find out what the barriers are that people tend to throw up, then you can, or when you're talking to them, then you can develop scripts and be prepared to remove those barriers when they bring them forward. And then you can, when there's no more reason for them to not to recycle in this case, then you just say, well, if there's nothing else, can we count on you recycling? And it's pretty hard for them to say no. So I often write scripts for my clients when I'm working on programs with them to do exactly what Anne's done. But you can see, if you're prepared, it's very easy to resolve some of these barriers. She did 3 in 1 minute. So another pathway we looked at, we talked to anglers, or we asked people if they were anglers. And you can see that 24%, so, you know, it was 77% of gardeners, 24% of Nova Scotians are anglers. So there's 2 main things that we're concerned about with angling. One is bait, that anglers may dump bait in the water, that unused bait, and that bait may be invasive. And second one, and more important for us in Nova Scotia right now, is to try and get people to stop moving fish that they catch in one lake and putting it in another for stocking purposes, for informal stocking purposes, so they can have those fish perhaps closer to where they live so they can catch them there too. Now in Nova Scotia, people can use bait. It's restricted. So you can see there in the most indented list, there are certain species that they cannot use live or dead as bait in when they're fishing, and they can't use any live bait that was from another province. But other than that, they can use bait. So we need to know how many people are using bait, because if nobody's really using it, then we don't really have to spend so much time on it. So we ask, how often do you use live bait? And it turns out that 50% of the time, or 52% of the time, people are using bait, live bait. 48% never do. So I shouldn't say 52% of the time. What I should say is 52% of people use bait and 48% don't use bait ever. So we do have to address this issue and try and get people to not dump their live bait into the water and instead dispose of it properly. This is, again, important information. It helps us design our interventions when we're talking to people, when we're talking to anglers. Now, on the second one, we asked, are you aware of, in the second issue, are you aware of anyone who has moved fish from one body of water to another for the purpose of stocking? Now, I'll just point out the wording in this question, because if you're creating a survey to find out this kind of information, it's really good to know this technique. This is called the third person technique, and it's written that way. I'll explain it in a second, but to avoid social response bias. And social response bias is a tendency for people in a survey to answer a question in the way that puts them in the best light. So if we had asked this question, have you ever moved fish from one body of water to another for the purpose of stocking? There would be a tendency for people to say no, even if they had, because they wouldn't want to look bad. Even though the survey is anonymous, it still holds true that social bias exists. But when we use a third-party technique and say, are you aware of anyone who has moved fish from one body of water to another for the purpose of stocking, that frees them up to say yes, because they're not admitting to anything. The one person that they know might be themselves, but they're not saying they had done it. So we tend to get more accurate numbers when you ask questions like that. In this case, 15% of people say that they know someone who has moved fish from one body of water to another for the purpose of stocking. That's given the risk, given the damage that can be caused when fish are moved from one body of water to another, that 15% is a pretty big number. That's scary, and it's something that we're already addressing, but we're going to have to continue to focus on. The Atlantic whitefish there's a small population in southwest Nova Scotia. It's a species at risk. It's the only population left in the world, and it's threatened by two invasive species, in particular, chain pickerel and smallmouth bass. And both chain pickerel and smallmouth bass have been transported from one lake to another by anglers. Chain pickerel is invasive. It's a voracious predator. It can wipe out a trout population in just a couple of years after it's introduced. And by doing so, it harms the traditional sport fishing opportunities that we have in Nova Scotia. And smallmouth bass was originally introduced in 1940s for sport fishing. It's also a very efficient predator, and it not only eats native species, but it also consumes much of the food that native species depend on for survival. So both of those fish, though, people like catching them because they're good fighting fish. And we have a problem with people in Nova Scotia, anglers, moving them about. So we need to have a targeted approach, and we do have one, but now we have more information to target it better and apply our Don't Let It Loose program. We use two logos for that. We use on the right there the Stop Aquatic Invasive Species logo that MAISC has developed through DFO, and also the Don't Let It Loose one that we use through the Canadian Council on Invasive Species, because we also deal with non-aquatic species in the Don't Let It Loose program. So we use both of those species, both of those logos in our program. The third pathway that I just want to talk about today is, do you own or operate any it's watercraft use. And we asked, do you own or operate any motorized or non-motorized watercraft? So 39% of Nova Scotians said yes, or 39% of the respondents said yes, they own or use watercraft. So we need to make sure that those people know how to clean, drain, and dry their boats, and understand when they should or when they shouldn't. Like in Nova Scotia, quite a few people have their boat and they put it in the beginning and put it in the ocean at the beginning of the year and take it out at the end of the year. So it's a bit different than those people who are going in and out of lakes and that kind of thing. So we have to make sure that people understand the risks and everything. We don't want zebra mussels. We don't have them yet. But of course we do have other aquatic plants and animals that we do not want moved around in boats or on boats. So we have the Clean, Drain, Dry program, and we have information from this survey so that we can be very targeted and efficient in our approach to boats. I'm not going to say much more about the boats, but I wanted to talk about boats because I also want to make the point that we can't just look at people as if they're gardeners or boat owners or anglers or hikers or people who work in the field. Many people are two or more of those things. So you'll remember we asked the question of everybody, do you own or operate any motorized or non-motorized watercraft? The number, I'm just going to skip back, I think it's 39%. 39% of all participants in the survey said they have a boat. I filtered the results for anglers. If somebody is an angler, they're 70% likely to have a boat and some sort of watercraft. So we also asked, when you go fishing, again, we asked anglers this question, when you go fishing, how often do you fish from a boat? Well, it's only 16% said never. The rest said, well, let's look at sometimes, usually, and always adds up to 51%. So just over half are sometimes, usually, or always fishing from a boat. This is actually lower than what I've found in other jurisdictions where I've done the work, but that's still at least half the people are fishing from a boat, and we saw that almost 70% have boats. So we have to address anglers when we have to address people not only as if they're a boater, but they're be an angler, because this guy here is cleaning his boat. Good for him. Is he a boater? Is he an angler? Or is he both? He might be a hiker, and he might be a guy that takes his family out camping, and they move firewood, and they go hiking. We can't just specify that, we can't just look at people as being so one-dimensional that they're only active in one pathway. People are generally active in multiple pathways, and I've found this in doing research all over the place. So, so the guy with the boat, we are going to address this guy here. We are going to address him with that Clean, Drain, Dry program because he's got a boat. But when we're finished talking to him about cleaning, draining, and drying that boat, we're going to say, by the way, do you fish? And if he says yes, then we're going to hit him with the Don't Let It Loose program as well. So again, I'd just like to thank the our funders. Without their support, we couldn't do this work. And this study will really help us to sharpen our pencil, I guess, when we're designing our programs, our Take Action programs. So it's, and again, I really encourage you to try to figure out, if you're going out and doing communications, there's much more to it than just handing out brochures or giving out fridge magnets or giving out stickers. There's nothing wrong with those things, but you need to understand that target audience if you really want to change their behaviors. You have to know what is preventing them from doing what you want them to do. And the only way to find that out is to ask them. It doesn't have to be a survey. Maybe it's when you're out in the field that you learn to start having conversations with people. But you need to find out what makes them tick and what doesn't make them tick in order to get them to change their behaviors. So I'll just leave you with this. There's my contact information. I do, that's my company, beyondattitude.com, or Beyond Attitude rather, Beyond Attitude Consulting. But I'm also a co-chair of the steering committee for the Nova Scotia Invasive Species Council, and I'm on the board of the Canadian Council on Invasive Species as well. Jessica, in the introduction, mentioned that I I publish weekly a newsletter on behavior change, and if you point your camera at that QR code, it'll take you to my website. If you want more information on this, you can subscribe, and there's always an unsubscribe button. So if it's not your cup of tea, you can always unsubscribe. So that's the end of the presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.